By any measure, America's health is failing as we spend far more per capita on health care than any other society in the world, and yet 2/3 of Americans are overweight and more than 15 million Americans have diabetes. The so-called war on cancer and the efforts to improve heart disease are failing as half of all Americans have a health problem that requires taking some prescription drug every week. More than 100 million of us have high cholesterol. We're going to talk about why this is the case, what the scientific evidence shows about our diet and that of others, including the Chinese, and what you need to know in order to change your life. Now, joining us here in the studio is Dr. T. Colin Campbell. He's Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. He spent his career in nutritional research. He's the culmination of which is the China Project, and that's a partnership of Cornell, Oxford University, and the Chinese Academy of Preventive Medicine, and he's the author of this book called The China Study. Welcome to Dallas, Colin.
Pleasure to be here.
Last night, you wowed an audience in Fort Worth at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. I have never seen an audience give a standing ovation to a college professor talking about nutrition. I don't know what you said, but you said something interesting.
Yeah, the students haven't done that to me very often.
I'm sure they don't do that very often.
Right.
But the people were impressed, and so I'd like you to give us and give that viewer right up front what it is that the China Study says and the China Project said and why it's sort of controversial.
Well, the China Study is a book, as you know. It covers a lot of territory, and one of the research projects that's highlighted in that book is the so-called China Project. But the book is a lot more than that. It covers my career, now going back more than 50 years. All the way through with the things that I did with my students, my colleagues, my fellow professors, and others. We learned a lot. I mean, I was working in the area of food and health, trying to figure out, what kind of food is good for health and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but then you did all this work and you were a researcher for all your life, but what did you find, for heaven's sakes, and why do we think it's so different?
Well, what I found is not what I intended to find. I mean, I ended up in a place that I didn't expect to be honest about it. In the beginning, I came from a farm, milking cows, went away to school to try to figure out how to help, in raising more cattle and eating more meat and drinking milk and eggs and that kind of thing. I believe in the good old American diet, I'll put it very simply. And the American diet has a lot of good features, but in a nutritional sense, it's not so good. And so today, I have a very different view, a view that sort of questions our consumption of so much animal-based foods, for one thing, as well as processed foods. And so you can see there that calorie consumption, for example, per unit body weight, as I say, is actually higher. Now, a lot of that is due to the fact they exercise more physical activity.
They don't weigh as much, basically.
They don't weigh as much. They don't get obesity. We didn't see any obese people there.
All right. But what about the fat content of their diet versus ours?
That was the big difference. I mean, our average fat intake in terms of percent of total calories, that's the way we like to express it, was around 35% or so. In China, the average in rural China was only about 15%. That was a remarkable difference. And a lot of that is attributed to the fact that they were consuming plant-based foods. Dietary fiber intake, dietary fiber only comes from plant-based foods, and you can see there the average is about 3 times what we consume. In fact, in some areas of China, it was far higher than that.
And what about that number that says animal protein there, their number and our number, for heaven's sake?
Yeah, you can see animal protein is only about, as a concentration of the total calories, is only about 1/10 of what we consume. In other words, these are people who are consuming a plant-based diet and very little animal food.
All right. I want to look at graphic 3 and then graphic 4 just until we get off this subject about protein in particular, and we'll focus on that. So if we're ready with graphic 3, the protein intake of U.S. versus China right there. Tell us about what that and what it means.
Well, you can see there the red bar. Animal protein is substantially higher. We consume, obviously, some plant protein. The total amount of protein is about 50% higher than rural China. But the ratio of the two, that's really what's significant here. We're about 70% or so of our total protein intake is from animal foods. We are almost carnivores in many ways. In China, you can see that the concentration of the total protein from animal foods is far, far lower.
All right, now let's look at the next graph, which is graphic number 4, which is a little bit different way of looking at that, and it's the basic percentages there. So tell us about that one too.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, making reference to before. It's much higher in the U.S. than in China, maybe even a little bit higher than what that left-hand chart, that bar shows. But in any case, it's about 70 to 75% of the total protein is animal-based.
Okay, so you found this, an incredibly large statistical analysis of all this. So what does it mean to us?
Well, in the statistical analysis, what we did, we measured all kinds of things. It really just wasn't protein. We measured food. We took blood samples, urine samples. You know, we analyzed it. About 24 different laboratories around the world got involved in this, and so we measured lots of different things. Protein was at the center of the plate, the center of our analysis too.
Yeah.
And what we learned was that as soon as they start, if you compare all the different counties, all the way from those that consume almost no animal protein, no animal foods, to those that consume 20% of the total, if you will. I didn't actually expect to see much in that kind of study. But what we did learn, as soon as you start comparing from that across that range, as soon as animal foods started to appear in the diet, things started to show up. Cholesterol levels started to go up. Cancer rates started to increase. Heart disease rates started to appear.
So you looked at a lot of different factors, of which protein was one of the major ones. You did some studies with rats. Tell us about that and how that really got your attention in terms of the connection between protein and cancer.
Yeah, this gives me an opportunity, Dennis. The China study standing alone has limitations as far as the science is concerned. It followed on, though, in the work that we had done before that you just referred to. The experimental animal studies, for example, and other kinds of studies that my colleagues were doing. And what we found in rats, for example, experimental rats, when we actually increased the protein intake in animals that were exposed to a carcinogen, for example, that gives liver cancer, as we increased protein intake, we turned on that cancer. It really started to grow. And then if we switched them midway through the process to a lower level of protein, it turned it off. We got to a point we could turn on and turn off cancer, experimental cancer in this case, simply by increasing protein or decreasing protein.
View and discuss past and present McQuestion TV episodes and subject matter. You can also follow McQuestion TV on Twitter @McQuestion TV or download McQuestion TV video podcasts on iTunes.